They hired him to clean floors, not save lives. But when the entire colony started collapsing, the alien engineers couldn't fix it, and the only person who understood the system was the janitor. The Interstellar Archive of Unlikely Victories contains stories so absurd that most historians delete them on principle. Located in a decaying orbital platform at the edge of known space, this repository holds the universe's discarded footnotes, the cosmic "did you know" facts that sensible beings ignore. Within its encrypted data vaults, you'll find a star that developed consciousness and immediately requested a legal name change, a species of mollusks that achieved faster-than-light travel by accidentally sneezing, and the complete voting records of 7 civilizations who independently concluded their ideal government involved competitive interpretive dance. The archive smells of old data crystals and forgotten memories. Its hallways stretch for miles, lined with storage units that haven't been accessed in centuries. Most visitors come out of morbid curiosity or academic desperation. Few leave unchanged. But one particular file, cataloged under critical clerical errors with heroic outcomes, remains the most borrowed entry in the entire database. The file is worn at the edges, its digital fingerprints smudged from repeated access. Archivists have considered moving it to the main collection, but bureaucratic inertia, the most powerful force in the universe, has kept it in the footnotes. It tells the story of a simple sanitation worker from Earth, a quiet man who found himself light years from home, clutching a mop and facing down a pirate fleet because someone somewhere checked the wrong box on an employment form. His name was Leonard Briggs, and he believed, with the unshakable faith of a monk, in the spiritual transcendence of a perfectly dry surface. Leonard stood before the main viewport of the battered cargo vessel Starlight Drifter, a ship that smelled faintly of recycled algae paste and regret. The ship had seen better centuries. Its hull was patched in 17 places. Its engines made a sound like a dying harmonica, and its artificial gravity had a nervous twitch that caused unsecured objects to drift toward the ceiling every 4th Tuesday. But the Starlight Drifter was paid for, which in interstellar freight meant more than luxury. His rubber-gloved hands moved in slow, practiced arcs, guiding his custom-fitted squeegee across the reinforced plexiglass. The tools sang against the surface, a soft whisper that Leonard found more comforting than any lullaby. He had owned this squeegee for 11 years. The rubber blade had been replaced 9 times. The handle had been re-gripped twice. But the tool itself, the fundamental object, remained. It had outlasted his marriage, his career, and his faith in corporate loyalty. The viewport had been opaque with cosmic dust when he started. 90 minutes later, the glass reflected the passing nebulae with mirror-like precision. Leonard exhaled, watching his breath fog a small patch. He wiped it away with a microfiber cloth, then tucked the cloth into its designated pocket on his utility vest, a vest with 37 specialized compartments, each labeled in his own neat handwriting. Compartment 7 held his general-purpose microfiber cloths. Compartment 12 held his heavy-duty degreaser. Compartment 23, his favorite, held the special lens cleaning solution he mixed himself using a formula developed over 20 years of trial and error. He had never told anyone the recipe. Some secrets, he believed, were worth taking to the grave. Have you ever found peace in a job that everyone else considers beneath them? Leonard understood something that most geniuses overlook. Systems, whether they move water through London or scrub grease off a starship floor, all obey the same principles of flow, pressure, and residue management. A pipe is a pipe, whether it carries drinking water or plasma coolant. A filter is a filter, whether it strains sediment or cosmic radiation. And a blockage is a blockage, whether it's limescale in a kettle or crystallized mineral deposits in a geothermal regulator. This understanding had not served him well in the corporate world. His managers had wanted presentations and projections. They had wanted PowerPoint slides with clip art and mission statements written by consultants who charged by the word. Leonard had wanted to show them the valve that was failing and explain, in simple terms, why tightening a specific bolt would solve three seemingly unrelated problems. They had nodded, smiled, and then hired the algorithm. He had once been a senior hydraulic engineer for the Thames Water Authority, a man who dreamed in pressure gradients and spoke fluent pipe. For 30 years, he had maintained the complex network of tunnels, pumps, and treatment facilities that delivered clean water to 9 million Londoners. He knew every major junction, every vulnerable section, every pipe that was likely to burst during a cold winter. He had saved the city from flooding 3 times, from contamination twice, and from a complete system shutdown once. Nobody had given him a medal. Nobody had thrown him a parade. But the taps had worked, and that had been enough. But corporate restructuring, a polite word for betrayal, replaced his 30 years of expertise with an algorithm and a recent graduate who thought backflow prevention was a type of dance. The algorithm, which cost the company a fraction of Leonard's salary, was designed by a software firm whose lead developer had never seen a water treatment facility. It optimized for paper efficiency, not actual efficiency. It generated beautiful charts that looked impressive in board meetings, but bore no relation to physical reality. The algorithm later caused a sewage overflow that closed Parliament for 3 days. The recent graduate, who had been put in charge of monitoring the algorithm, was on vacation at the time. He had set up an autoresponder on his email and was hiking in the Scottish Highlands while raw sewage backed up into the Houses of Parliament. Leonard allowed himself a quiet smile at that memory. He had read about the incident in a discarded newspaper while waiting for a freight transfer. A small, grim flicker of satisfaction had warmed his chest. He was not proud of this feeling. But he did not suppress it either. The universe runs on systems. And systems, eventually, need someone to clean up the mess. Now he cleaned floors and windows for intergalactic freighter lines. The work was honest. A dirty surface became clean. Cause and effect. No algorithms. No backstabbing. Just him, his squeegee, and the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. The pay was worse. The accommodations were worse. The food was significantly worse. But Leonard slept better than he had in years. The Starlight Drifter's intercom crackled, followed by a pleasant synthesized voice, female-coded, and infused with a relentless cheerfulness that Leonard found mildly unsettling. Attention passenger Leonard Briggs. We are approaching our final destination, Dustfall Colony. Local authorities have been notified of your arrival. They sound excited. Leonard dipped his squeegee into a bucket of ammonia solution and prepared for another pass. That's nice, he said to the empty corridor. Probably meant for someone else. Incorrect. The AI, who had introduced herself as Vera on the first day of the journey, chirped back. You are the sole passenger disembarking at this location. According to our manifest, you are Leonard Briggs, Senior Hostile Environment Sentry and Systems Specialist, contracted by Dustfall Colony Municipal Council under emergency procurement provisions. Leonard froze, squeegee hovering an inch from the glass. He frowned, his brow furrowing behind his practical wire-rimmed spectacles. I think you'll find I'm Senior Sanitation Systems Specialist. Hazardous Environmental Sanitation and Systems Maintenance. HESM. Different acronym. Different job entirely. A long pause filled the corridor. The ship's inertial dampeners hummed, a deep bass note that vibrated through the deck plates. Leonard could hear the distant clanking of the cargo bay doors, preparing for arrival. My apologies, Vera said, her cheerful tone wavering for a microsecond. I appear to have 2 conflicting work orders under the same acronym. One for hazardous environmental sanitation and systems maintenance. One for hostile environment sentry and systems management. Both abbreviated HESSM. The statistical improbability of this error is concerning. Leonard sighed, a deep, world-weary exhale that he had perfected over 52 years of navigating bureaucratic incompetence. He had once watched the London Water Authority lose an entire pumping station for 6 hours because someone filed the maintenance request under P for pump instead of M for maintenance. He had spent 3 days untangling a payroll error caused by a single misplaced decimal point. He had learned long ago that arguing with bureaucracy, whether human or digital, was as pointless as trying to mop up the ocean. Someone, somewhere, had ticked the wrong box. The mix-up would resolve itself. It always did. He returned to his work. Another perfect, satisfying pull with the squeegee. The universe might be a chaotic mess of crossed wires and clerical errors, but this small pane of glass, at least, was a bastion of clarity. How many times have you been forced into a role you never asked for? Dustfall Colony's landing pad was a scar of compacted red soil surrounded by prefabricated domes, each one coated in a fine layer of abrasive silt. The settlement sprawled before Leonard like a collection of rusty mushrooms, scattered as if dropped from a great height by a distracted giant. A fine layer of crimson dust coated everything, giving the entire place the uniform, weathered look of a relic half buried and forgotten. The air hit Leonard like a hairdryer set to the surface of Venus, dry, metallic, and oppressively hot. The local star, a swollen orange giant that dominated the sky like an angry eye, beat down with relentless fury. Leonard's coveralls, which had seemed perfectly reasonable on the climate-controlled ship, immediately became an instrument of slow cooking. He could feel sweat beading on his forehead and trickling down his back within seconds of exiting the cargo ramp. A small crowd of aliens had gathered to watch his arrival. Some were tall and insectoid, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the harsh light. Others were low and crab-like, scuttling sideways on multiple legs. A few floated a few centimeters off the ground, their translucent bodies pulsing with slow, rhythmic light. They regarded Leonard with expressions that ranged from curiosity to confusion to, in one case, what appeared to be mild disappointment. Before Leonard could orient himself, a figure detached from the group and rushed toward him with a delicate, multi-jointed gait. The creature was encased in articulated golden armor, each segment moving independently to allow a surprising range of motion. Her head was a smooth oval, a cluster of optical lenses reflecting the orange light where a face might be. Two thin, whip-like sensor stalks twitched above her skull at a frequency suggesting extreme distress. A translator box on her chest crackled and spat as it converted her high-pitched chirps and clicks into galactic standard. "You there! Thank the great condenser. I am Mayor Velix. We are in a state of extreme procedural catastrophe." Her voice, filtered through the translator, had a breathless, panicked quality. But underneath the translated words, Leonard could hear the raw, percussive clicks of her native language, a series of sounds that communicated a universal terror transcending species boundaries. She was, by any measure, utterly terrified. The mayor's articulated suit came to a halt directly in front of Leonard, her sensor stalks vibrating so intensely they became a blur. She was close enough that Leonard could see the individual lenses in her eye cluster, each one reflecting a different fragment of his bewildered face. She shoved a heavy datapad into Leonard's hands before he could offer a greeting, or more importantly, a correction regarding his job title. The screen displayed a dense schematic of the colony's geothermal power grid, a nightmare tangle of pressure conduits, heat exchangers, and regulator valves. Overlaid on this schematic were blinking crimson icons, pulsing in an arrhythmic, frantic pattern that suggested system-wide failure was imminent. "The main geothermal conduit is failing," Mayor Velix explained, her words tumbling out in a torrent of technical jargon that Leonard only half understood. "The primary regulator valve is seizing, causing a pressure chain reaction. The entire defense grid is inert. We have been broadcasting a Priority 1 distress call for nearly 36 hours. The Ragged Helix pirates monitor this sector, and we are, to use the technical term, completely exposed." Leonard blinked, looking from the dense web of failure state icons on the schematic to the mayor's twitching sensor stalks. The problem looked complex, far beyond his training as a sanitation specialist. But even through the jargon, he recognized the underlying pattern. The same pattern he had seen 1,000 times in London's water system. A blockage, a feedback loop, a system choking on its own pressure. "Madame Mayor," he began, holding up a placating hand, "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding. You see, I am actually a sanitation." "Yes, yes," she interrupted, cutting him off with a sharp, dismissive click from her suit's vocalizer. "Hostile Environment Sentry and Systems Management Specialist, HESM. We appreciate your modesty. A sign of true genius, I am sure. Pleasantries must wait. The pirates are coming." She grabbed him by the sleeve of his beige coveralls and hustled him toward the largest dome, a hulking rust-streaked structure from which a low, sickly hum emanated. Leonard clutched the heavy datapad in one hand and dragged his custodial crate, a wheeled cabinet of organized cleaning supplies, with the other. The crate's wheels rumbled over the uneven ground, and Leonard felt the mayor's surprisingly strong grip propel him forward despite his attempts to slow their progress. "My squeegee," he muttered, pointing at the tool protruding from his crate. "I'm more of a polymer-based surface maintenance expert. I clean things, floors, windows, the occasional biohazard spill. They're excellent." Mayor Velix exclaimed, clearly interpreting his words to fit her desperate needs. "A specialist in polymer-based systems. A polymer composite lines the conduits. You are perfect. Absolutely perfect for the job." They arrived at a heavy blast door, which hissed open to reveal a room where technology was actively dying. Consoles sparked intermittently, sending small showers of blue-white light across the darkened space. Lights flickered with a dying, rhythmic pulse, as though the room itself was taking its last breaths. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and smoldering insulation, an acrid cocktail that caught at the back of Leonard's throat. Two tall, thin figures in gray environmental suits darted between terminals. Their helmets were smooth, featureless funnels aimed toward the consoles rather than containing visible faces. They were Valaxians, Leonard recalled from his pre-travel briefing, a species that perceived the world through acute sonic imaging. Their long, multi-jointed digits danced uselessly across holographic keyboards, their movements growing more frantic with each passing second. Mayor Velix's translator crackled. "The specialist is here. Report." The two engineers turned, swiveling their helmeted heads to aim their acoustic senses at Leonard. A slow, discordant hum emanated from their suit speakers, a sonic expression of disdain that Leonard felt in his chest rather than heard with his ears. They took in his rumpled overalls, his mild-mannered face, the practical wire-rimmed spectacles, and the large custodial crate he was still dragging behind him. "This is the expert?" One of them hissed, his translated voice a low, static buzz. "He looks like he is here to empty the waste receptacles. Observe his credentials," the other added, turning his helmet to focus on the squeegee poking out of the side pocket of Leonard's crate. "Perhaps he intends to wipe the error messages from the screens. A novel approach. Likely ineffective, but novel." Mayor Velix's sensor stalks stiffened. "He is a specialist in polymer composites." "Explain the situation, now." The first engineer, who identified himself with a disdainful flick of his multi-jointed fingers as NX, gestured condescendingly at the main console. As any first-year technician could grasp, the grid's main conduit draws superheated fluid from the geothermal vent. A blockage in the primary regulator valve has caused a pressure backflow. The system is trying to draw more power to compensate, which only accelerates the pressure buildup. A self-perpetuating feedback spiral. "We have attempted a full diagnostic, of course," the second engineer, Quill, chimed in, managing to sound both bored and superior. "But the initial pressure surge fried the digital diagnostic ports. We are operating completely blind while the generator tries to tear itself apart. The acoustic signatures are most distressing. Have you ever watched experts panic while ignoring the obvious solution?" Leonard listened patiently, nodding as though he understood the barrage of technical jargon. In truth, most of it went over his head. He was a janitor, not an engineer. But he recognized the problem's core. He recognized the tone of voice, the same air of baffled intellectual superiority he used to hear from the graduate engineers at the Water Authority right before they confessed their confusion as to why a pump station had started running in reverse. He looked past the sparking consoles and the frantic engineers. He looked at the flickering lights, the way they dimmed and pulsed in a steady, rhythmic pattern. He recognized that rhythm. It was the familiar heartbeat of a blockage, a system struggling to push fluid through an increasingly narrow passage. He had felt that same stuttering pulse in 100 different pipes across London. He placed a hand on the main conduit pipe, a massive cylinder of metal that ran across the floor. It was warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been. And through the thick metal casing, he could feel a stuttering, intermittent shudder, a world away from the smooth, powerful thrum of a healthy system. "Forgive me for asking," Leonard said, his voice quiet and calm in the buzzing chaos of the room. "But have you checked the pressure filters recently?" The two engineers went rigid. Their helmeted heads swiveled toward each other, then back to Leonard. A long, uncomfortable silence filled the room. "The pressure filters?" Enix repeated, the words emerging as though they were a foul taste in his mouth. "We are discussing a catastrophic pressure failure that threatens to destroy our entire settlement. And you are talking about plumbing? The superheated fluid has to pass through something before it hits the turbines, doesn't it?" Leonard asked reasonably, kneeling to examine the base of the main conduit pipe. "If the filters are clogged, flow rate drops, the main pump overheats, and the system tries to compensate. Things go downhill from there. It is just a thought. I could be entirely wrong." He ran his fingers along the pipe's base, feeling for what his eyes could not see. The surface was rough, coated in years of accumulated grime and oxidation. But near the junction where the pipe met the regulator valve, he found what he was looking for: a faint, glossy sheen. A residue, like limescale in a kettle, but far more exotic. Calcified mineral deposits, baked onto the metal by years of superheated fluid flow. Before the engineers could formulate a sufficiently withering retort, a deafening klaxon blared through the control room. A new icon flashed on the main screen, a stylized skull and crossbones that seemed, to Leonard, a trifle dramatic for the situation. Proximity alert. Mayor Velix shrieked, her sensor stalks flattening against her suited head. Pirate broadcast detected. Ragged Helix signature. They are coming. They are actually coming. The grid's active defense protocols are engaging automatically, Enix announced, his voice rising in pitch. On the main screen, the defense grid schematic flickered to life. Power levels surged upward, a brief, hopeful spike that made the room's lights brighten for a single glorious second. Then, with a sound like a giant tearing a phone book in half, the entire system spluttered and died. The lights in the control room flickered wildly, then died altogether, plunging them into a pulsing red gloom from the emergency strobes. The generator's sickly hum choked, coughed, and fell silent. The only sounds remaining were the rhythmic shriek of the proximity alert and the frantic clicking of Mayor Velix's suit as her species. Equivalent of hyperventilation filled the room. "Catastrophic failure," Enix wailed, his composure shattering completely. A power surge from the automated defense activation fused the main ignition switch. "It is a hard lock, physically fused. We cannot reset it." The surge also welded the diagnostic port contacts, Quill added, his lanky body slumping over a dead console. "We are completely blind. There is no way to interface with the system. It would take a week to manually bypass the lockdown protocol. We are finished. The pirates will be here in minutes." The two engineers shouted at each other, their jargon escalating into a hysterical symphony of technobabble. Words like plasma feedback and thermal runaway and catastrophic cascade failure flew back and forth, each one more alarming than the last. Mayor Velix's suit was emitting a continuous stream of high-frequency clicks, the insectoid equivalent of a panic attack. Amid the shouting and clicking, Leonard Pummel remained still. His mind, trained by decades of diagnosing hidden problems, filtered out the noise and focused on what his senses were telling him. He knelt again beside the conduit, placing his steady, chapped hand on the metal. It was still warm, but the vibration had changed. The stuttering, uneven throb was more pronounced now, the system's dying gasps transmitted through the pipe. But underneath that death rattle, Leonard could feel something else. A second vibration, fainter but more regular. The emergency battery backup still feeding a trickle of power to the most critical systems. He traced the conduit with his fingers, following its path to where it met the primary regulator valve, a complex knot of pipes and wiring. The glossy residue was thicker there, caked onto the metal in a crusty layer. He scraped at it with a fingernail. It flaked off in brittle shards. He walked over to his custodial crate, the wheels rumbling on the metal deck. The others, lost in their panic, were oblivious to his movement. He opened the lid with a familiar click, the sound cutting through the chaos like a small island of order in a storm of disorder. He reached past the spray bottles, the cloths, and the mops, retrieving a tool from deep inside the crate. It was a heavy-duty ship maintenance scourer, a powerful, blocky device with a vibrating head designed for stripping carbon scoring off engine blocks and removing stubborn alien barnacles from starship hulls. In essence, it was a ridiculously overpowered orbital sander. He had bought it at a space station pawn shop 3 years ago, recognizing its potential for dealing with the most stubborn cleaning jobs. The previous owner had used it to remove graffiti from a cargo container. Leonard had used it to dissolve a crystallized biospill that had defeated 3 other cleaning crews. He carried the scourer back to the regulator valve. Enix, noticing him for the first time since the lights went out, let out a squawk of indignation. "What in the name of the great condenser are you doing with that polisher?" "This tool applies high-frequency vibrations to break up mineral deposits," Leonard said, his focus entirely on the task at hand. He found a power coupling on the wall, thankfully still running on the emergency battery circuit, and plugged the scourer in. The device hummed to life, a deep, satisfying baritone that vibrated through the floor. "You must be joking," Quill shrieked. "That is the primary regulator valve. If you damage it, the entire system will be beyond repair. You'll rupture the casing. You will cause a plasma leak. You will kill us all." "It is called percussive maintenance," Leonard said, using a term he had learned from an old, grizzled mechanic on a long-forgotten space station. The mechanic had been missing 3 fingers and had a cough that sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. But he had kept a fusion reactor running for 40 years, past its projected lifespan, using nothing but a hammer and a lot of creative swearing. He located the densest part of the deposit, braced himself, and clamped the scourer's oscillating motor directly onto the blocked valve housing. He adjusted a small dial, turning the device's throwing pitch by ear, a trick he had learned for finding the right vibration frequency to shatter stubborn blockages without damaging the underlying surface. He thumbed the activation switch. A deep, resonant vibration shot through the pipe. The entire control room groaned, metal straining against pressure. Dust shook from the ceiling. A loose panel clattered to the floor. The vibration built, a grinding, shuddering rumble that grew louder and louder until it seemed the whole room would shake itself apart. Then came a sound like a giant clearing its throat. A deep, grinding crack echoed through the space, followed by a powerful whoosh as years of constricted fluid surged free. The mineral deposit had disintegrated into a cloud of inert particles, carried away by the sudden rush of superheated liquid. A cheer went up from Mayor Velix, but a sickening clunk from the main generator cut it short. The generator, no longer blocked, had power flowing through its system again. But the ignition switch remained fused. The engine could not restart itself. The flow is restored, Enix shouted, staring at a miraculously reactivated pressure gauge. But the ignition switch is still fused solid. Without that, we cannot restart the generator. It is useless. The power is there, but we cannot access it. Leonard was already moving. He peered into the generator's primary housing, its access panel blown off in the earlier surge. Sparks showered from within, small cascades of blue-white light that illuminated the darkness. Two massive copper contacts, each the size of his fist, were welded together by the intense heat from the overload. The system needed a jump start. He glanced around. The engineers stood frozen, their featureless helmets aimed at him. Mayor Velix's suit was clicking like a Geiger counter in a uranium mine. He had to act immediately. The pirates were coming. The colony was defenseless. And he was the only one who understood that sometimes the most sophisticated problems require the simplest solutions. He jogged back to his crate. This time, he reached into a different compartment, one containing his heavy-duty mopping supplies. He reached past the mop, past the spare bucket, past the emergency spill kit, and grabbed the bucket itself. It was fashioned from a thick, insulating polymer with two heavy rubber grips on the handle. Armed with the two rubber grips, one in each hand, he returned to the sparking generator housing. "Stand back," he said, his voice calm and certain, like a man who had dealt with overflowing toilets in zero gravity and knew a thing or two about hazardous environments. This might get bright. To the horror of the engineers and the mayor, Leonard Briggs reached into the heart of the dying machine. Using the thick rubber grips to insulate himself from the raw arcing electricity, Leonard grabbed the massive copper contacts. They were hot enough that he could feel the warmth through the rubber. The metal groaned under his grip, fused together by the electrical surge that had killed the system. He grunted with effort, his muscles straining. He was not a strong man. He had never been a strong man. His strength was in his patience, his attention to detail, his understanding of systems. But right now, none of those things would help. Right now, he needed to do something that required brute force. For a terrible moment, the contacts held fast. Sweat dripped from Leonard's forehead onto the hot metal, sizzling into steam. His arms trembled with the effort. Behind him, he could hear Mayor Velix's translator emitting a continuous stream of high-pitched static, the insectoid equivalent of a prayer. Then, with a wrenching shriek of tortured metal, he pulled the fused contacts apart. Blue-white energy, raw and untamed, leapt across the newly formed gap. The arc was blinding, a miniature lightning bolt contained within the generator housing. It bathed the room in a flash so bright that Leonard saw spots even through his squeezed-shut eyes. Before the safety relays could trip, before the arc could stabilize into a continuous burn, Leonard slammed the contacts back together. Clang! The sound was a deep, resonant chime that vibrated through the deck plates, through the walls, through the very bones of everyone in the room. It was the sound of connection, of completion, of a circuit closed against all odds. The room went still for a single heartbeat. Then a low hum began. It grew, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. The sound rose from a sickly groan to a tentative thrum, from a tentative thrum to a powerful, steady roar. The emergency strobes cut out as the main lights flickered, buzzed, and blazed to life, brighter and steadier than before. The consoles around the room lit up one by one, their screens displaying rows of calming green text. System nominal. All systems operational. Defense grid active. On the main screen, the pirate proximity warning flashed a frantic automated retreat code before blinking out entirely. The ragged Helix crew, presumably having detected the sudden massive power signature of a fully functional planetary defense grid, had wisely decided to seek easier prey elsewhere. Their ship, a patchwork junker held together by desperation and spite, turned and limped back toward the asteroid field from which it had emerged. The control room filled with the steady, reassuring hum of a machine doing its job. The sound was not loud, but it was solid. It was the sound of order restored, of chaos pushed back, of a small corner of the universe functioning as it should. No one spoke. Enix and Quill stood motionless, their featureless helmets aimed at Leonard. The silence from their suit speakers conveyed a profound bafflement that their species rarely showed. They had been useless. They had wallowed in their theories, while a janitor had saved them with a power tool and a mop bucket. The realization hung in the air between them, heavier than any words. Mayor Velix's suit stopped its frantic clicking. The long, delicate sensor stalks, which had been a blur of anxiety, were now perfectly, unnervingly still. She turned her suit's head to fix its cluster of lenses on the grime-covered human standing beside the now purring generator. Leonard was wiping a smear of grease from his cheek with the back of his hand. There was a smudge of soot on his nose, a tear in his coveralls where a spark had caught the fabric, and a general air of exhaustion about him. He looked like a man who had just finished a particularly difficult plumbing job, which, in a very real sense, he had. Mayor Velix took a slow, deliberate step toward him. She stopped, and she tilted her suit's head as if seeing him for the first time. The tiny translator on her chest crackled to life. Her voice, once a high-pitched shriek, was now a quiet, awestruck whisper. You rescued us." 3 hours later, after Leonard had been given a chance to wash his face and drink something that was not recycled nutrient slurry, the emergency town meeting convened in Dustfall Colony's central dome. The dome was a large, dusty structure with acoustics that turned every speech into an echoing muddle. The air was thick with alien body odor and the low hum of nervous chatter. Leonard stood near the back, attempting to fade into the dusty background. This was difficult when Mayor Velix kept pointing one of her suit's slender metallic limbs in his direction. She stood on a raised platform, her sensor stalks held high and proud. The crisis had, it seemed, served her political career well. She projected confidence, a leader who had, through her own foresight and wisdom, procured a savior for the town. "Citizens of Dustfall Colony," she chirped, her translated voice booming through the dome speakers. "We stood on the brink of disaster. Our existence was threatened by the cowardly pirates from the Ragged Helix. Our so-called experts," she swiveled to shoot a withering glare at Enix and Quill, who were trying to merge with the wall, were useless. They wallowed in their theories while our home faced annihilation. A rumble of agreement went through the assembled crowd of miners, farmers, and assorted frontier-dwelling oddities. Someone shouted something that sounded like agreement. Someone else hissed. A third being, whose anatomy Leonard could not quite parse, emitted a deep, resonant hum of approval. "But I," Mayor Velix continued, puffing out her suit's thorax plating, "had a plan. I requisitioned a specialist of a different caliber. A being free from rigid dogma and useless schematics. A being of action. A being who understands that sometimes the most complex problems require a simple, direct approach." She gestured dramatically toward Leonard. Everyone in the dome turned to stare at him. Leonard gave a weak, awkward wave. He wished, more than anything, that he had a floor to clean, a window to polish, anything to focus on besides the combined attention of several hundred aliens. This human, Mayor Velix boomed, this Leonard Briggs, looked for a practical solution. He identified the problem, and he cleaned it up. This line got a surprising amount of applause. Dustfall Colony was a town that understood messes. They lived in a constant cloud of abrasive dust. Their equipment was always breaking down. Their living quarters were perpetually coated in a fine layer of red grit. The idea of someone who could clean things up resonated with them on a deep, almost spiritual level. "He found the grime in our system, and he scoured it clean," the mayor continued, warming to her theme. "He located the blockage in our colony's arteries, and he cleared it. This is the kind of thinking that Dustfall Colony needs. This is why, using my emergency powers as mayor, I am addressing another long-standing issue." She paused for dramatic effect. The crowd leaned forward as one. "The position of colonial sheriff has remained vacant for far too long," she declared. "We have been a town without a guiding hand, without someone to maintain public order. That ends today. I hereby declare the position filled." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Leonard felt a prickling dread crawl up his spine, a familiar sensation. It was the same feeling he used to get right before his boss at the Water Authority would announce a new round of synergistic restructuring. That feeling had never preceded anything good. "We need a sheriff who can clean up messes," Mayor Velix boomed. "And you, Leonard Briggs, are the most qualified person I could imagine." She scuttled down from the platform and marched directly toward Leonard, who was now actively trying to back away. A path cleared before her, the crowd parting like water around a stone. In one hand, she held up a tarnished star-shaped piece of metal. It was the sheriff's badge, dented and scratched from years of hard use by a succession of lawmen who had all, apparently, met unfortunate ends. "Mr. Briggs," she said, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that only he could hear, "this is a tremendous opportunity for both of us. You look like a hero. I look like a genius for finding you. Everyone wins. The colony gets a sheriff. The pirates stay away. And you get a purpose." "But Madame Mayor," Leonard stammered, trying desperately to dissuade her, "I am a janitor. I clean things. I am no lawman. I lack the first idea of where to begin. I have never fired a weapon. I have never arrested anyone. I do not even know the local laws." "Nonsense," she chirped loudly, for the benefit of the crowd. "Your modesty is, as always, commendable. But the colony needs you. We need your practical wisdom. We need your ability to see past the obvious and find the root cause of problems. And frankly, we need someone who is not afraid of paperwork." Before he could protest further, she pinned the tarnished badge to the front of his coveralls. It clanked against the pen in his pocket. The dome went silent. Every eye in the room was fixed on the small, unassuming human with a cleaning tool protruding from his pocket and a dented star on his chest. Then, a massive rock-jawed Derg miner near the front rumbled. He got the power back on. "Good enough for me." A murmur of agreement swept through the room, which then erupted into a cacophony of cheers, whistles, and approving rumbles. The sound was deafening, a wall of alien approval that pressed against Leonard from all sides. Leonard Briggs, Senior Sanitation Systems Specialist, stood bewildered in the center of the town hall. The newly appointed sheriff of Dustfall Colony. He looked down at the badge, then at the cheering locals. A single, profound thought echoed through the quiet, orderly space of his mind. One man's clerical error is another man's second act. This is going to be an absolute nightmare to keep clean. The previous sheriff's office was chaos itself, a testament to a level of profound, almost artistic neglect. It looked as if a tornado made of paperwork and old food containers had passed through, grown depressed, and decided to stay. Dust lay so thick on every surface that it had achieved the status of a geological layer. A fine red film coated everything, courtesy of the planet's ubiquitous silica storms that swept through the colony twice a week. The air smelled of stale calf, unidentified fried things, and unsolved problems. There was a particularly pungent odor coming from a corner that Leonard chose not to investigate too closely. Some mysteries, he had learned, were best left undisturbed. Leonard stood in the doorway for a full 5 minutes, his mind, trained to break down complex systems into manageable parts, systematically cataloging the horror before him. He was formulating a multi-stage deep cleaning plan. Stage 1. Debris removal of all visible trash and abandoned items. Stage 2. Particulate extraction via high-powered vacuum, focusing on the layers of dust that had accumulated over what appeared to be years. Stage 3. Surface sanitation with a broad-spectrum antimicrobial agent, followed by a final polish. He sighed and retrieved his custodial crate from the street outside. The crate which had accompanied him across a dozen star systems, contained everything he would need. He was just wrestling a large, semi-petrified pile of what might have once been laundry from the corner when a shadow fell over the doorway. Leonard looked up. The figure blocking the light was immense. He was a Durg, a species Leonard had only read about in pre-travel briefings. His body was a slow-moving shelled form, protected by thick sculpted plates secreted from his own mantle. The shell was the color of weathered sandstone, marked with intricate patterns that might have been natural, or might have been tattoos. Two powerful primary limbs, ending in three-fingered hands, rested at his sides. A series of finer, more delicate tendrils were coiled beneath his forward mantle, used for tasks requiring precision. His head, emerging from the shell's opening, was broad and patient. Two deep-set, intelligent eyes observed the room with placid focus. He stood there, silent and still, his presence filling the entire doorway. He was, Leonard recognized, the bouncer at the local cantina, the driller's end. He had seen this Durg eject a belligerent freighter pilot earlier that day by simply picking him up and placing him outside, with all the gentle finality of someone moving a piece of furniture. The Durg took a slow step inside. The floorboards groaned in protest under his weight. He looked at the chaos in the office, then at Leonard, who was holding a fossilized sock at arm's length. A low, resonant sound emanated from the Durg's chest, a deep rumble that vibrated through the soles of Leonard's boots. "Messy," the Durg grumbled. The single word sounded like stones grinding together at the bottom of a deep well. "That is one word for it," Leonard agreed, dropping the sock into a refuse sack. I was leaning towards biohazard, possibly with a side of archaeological site. I think I just found something that might predate the colony itself. The Durg's gaze moved to Leonard's custodial crate, then to the orderly way Leonard was already sorting the debris into piles. Recyclables, compostable organics, outright hazardous waste. The Durg watched him, his deep-set eyes fixed on the sorting process with what appeared to be genuine interest. The Durg had been in the control room during the crisis. Leonard remembered seeing him now, a silent observer at the back, watching the chaos with the same patient stillness he was displaying now. He had seen everything. He had seen the engineers panic. He had seen the mayor shriek. And he had seen Leonard, a janitor with a power tool, save the colony. Another rumble, this one softer. "Grum, I beg your pardon?" Leonard asked, pausing in his sorting. "My name, Grum," the Durg clarified, tapping his massive chest with one of his primary hands. He then pointed a thick, clawed finger at the tarnished badge on Leonard's coveralls. "Sheriff." He pointed back at himself. "Duty." The declaration was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a mountain, declaring its intent to remain a mountain. There was no question in Grum's voice. There was no request for permission. He had decided that his duty was to serve as deputy to this strange, soft-skinned creature who had fixed the generator with a sander and a mop bucket. Leonard looked at the two-armed wall of muscle before him. He thought about the mountain of paperwork he had inherited, the surly miners who frequented the cantina, the general lawlessness that a frontier colony like this must attract. He was out of his depth, and he knew it. He needed an ally. He needed someone who understood the local customs, the local threats, the local way of doing things. What happens when you accept help from the last person anyone would expect? "All right," Leonard said, extending a hand. "Welcome aboard, Deputy. You can start with that pile over there." Grum nodded once, a gesture of immense gravity, and went to work. His primary limbs cleared the heavier debris, lifting pieces of furniture that Leonard could not have budged. His finer tendrils sorted smaller items with surprising dexterity, separating papers into chronological order and stacking datapads by their serial numbers. He worked in a comfortable silence, his massive form moving through the office with a grace that belied his size. As they worked, a quiet partnership formed. Leonard would point at something that needed doing, and Grum would do it. Grum would hold something steady so Leonard could clean underneath it. They communicated with grunts and gestures, a language that transcended words. Leonard had found a deputy who understood the satisfaction of bringing order to chaos. Their first official case arrived the next morning. It came in the form of a high-strung, plant-based farmer named Krelb, who tapped a rapid rhythm on the newly swept floor of the sheriff's office with his 6 spindly root legs. His leafy crest was drooping, and his bark-like skin had taken on a pale, sickly hue. "They are gone," Krelb wailed. "All gone. My prize-winning luminescent sporocytes, the pride of my hydroponics farm. Vanished overnight. Someone has stolen them. Someone has ruined me." Leonard, who was wiping down the last of the grime from the office's single window, set his cloth aside and gave the farmer his full attention. "Vanished from where, exactly?" "From my secure laboratory." Krelb gestured wildly with his upper branches. "I locked the room from the inside. The chronometer logs show the door was sealed all night. But this morning, the entire cultivation tray was empty. The sporocytes are gone. Just gone. Like they were never there." "Any suspects?" Leonard asked, pulling out a notepad. He had learned that the first step in any investigation, whether a missing spore or a broken water main, was gathering information. "Fine," Krelb hissed, his leaves trembling. "That competitive cheat from the next dome over. He has envied my sporocytes for years. He would do anything to get his hands on them. Anything." Leonard and Grum followed the distraught farmer to his hydroponics dome. The lab was a small, sterile white room filled with bubbling tanks and humming machinery. An empty cultivation tray sat on a central table, its surface clean and unmarked. The air smelled of damp earth and chlorophyll, the familiar scent of growing things. Krelb pointed at the door controls. "See? Locked. Logs show the seal held all night. No one entered. No one left. And yet, the sporocytes are gone." Grum examined the lock, then the thick walls of the lab, scanning for any physical breach. He ran his massive hands over the surfaces, his tendrils probing the seams. He rumbled low and deep. "Solid. No breach." Krelb wrung his twig-like hands in despair. "It is a locked room mystery. A perfect crime. I am ruined. Completely and utterly ruined." While the farmer lamented, and Grum continued his physical inspection, Leonard focused elsewhere. He had learned, from years of cleaning up after people, that they rarely looked down. Locks and walls were for amateurs. The real story was always on the floor. People shed. Things shed. Every object, every organism left a trail. "Could you dim the lights, please?" Leonard asked Krelb, "If you would not mind." Krelb, confused but desperate, complied. The lab plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of nutrient solution monitors on the bubbling tanks. The darkness was almost complete, broken only by the occasional blink of a status LED. Leonard walked over to his trusty custodial crate, which Grum had carried for him, and retrieved a small handheld device. It was a sanitation-grade UV light, designed to reveal organic residue invisible under normal light. He had used it 1,000 times to find spills that had been improperly cleaned, to identify contamination sources, to track the spread of biological matter through sensitive environments. He clicked it on, casting a pool of eerie purple light onto the pristine white floor. "The sporocytes," Leonard said, sweeping the UV beam in a slow arc. "You said they were luminescent." "Yes," Krelb confirmed. "Their glow is a key indicator of their nitrogen-fixing viability. It is what makes them so valuable for our crop seasons. The glow tells us they are healthy, that they are ready for planting, that they will produce a good harvest. And like most things that glow," Leonard continued, his voice calm and steady, "they shed. They shed constantly. Microscopic particles, too small to see with the naked eye. But under the right light, under the right conditions, they leave a trail. Most messes do. You just need the right illumination to see them. A faint trail of tiny glowing specks appeared on the floor. They were as fine as dust motes, smaller than the period at the end of this sentence, imperceptible in the visible spectrum. But under the UV beam, they shone like a miniature galaxy scattered across the white tile. The trail led from the empty cultivation tray toward a small grated panel in the wall. "What is that?" Leonard asked, pointing the beam at the panel. "A ventilation duct," Crowd said, his voice uncertain. "But it is sealed. I sealed it myself. I checked the seals regularly. They were intact. They had to be intact. The sporocytes are sensitive to temperature fluctuations." Grum stepped forward and with a single effortless tug, pulled the grate away from the wall. The screws, which had been driven deep into the wall, screeched in protest. Behind the grate, the duct was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for a small creature to squeeze through. But the glowing trail of spore dust led directly inside. "The thief came through the vents," Leonard said, shining the light into the duct. And judging by the size of the vent, he or she was small, flexible, able to flatten their body to fit through narrow spaces. He looked at Krelb. "Has your rival vine happened to employ any slink workers? Small serpentine, capable of extreme compression?" Krelb gasped, his leaves shuddering. "His chief agriculturalist is a slink, that slithering cheat." "I knew it. I knew he was behind this." Leonard switched off the light and stood up. "The trail leads from your lab out a ventilation duct that should have been sealed, and I would be willing to bet a lifetime supply of polishing compound that it leads straight to your rival's greenhouse. Shall we go find out?" An hour later, confronted with the glowing spore dust on his slink employee's workstation, Vine confessed. The spores were returned, still viable, still healthy, and Kreld's crop was saved. The slink, who had only followed orders, was fined and reassigned. As they walked back to the office, Grum let out a low rumble of approval. "Good eyes, Sheriff. It is amazing what you can find," Leonard replied, patting his custodial crate affectionately, "when you know where to look for the dirt." In the quiet moments between civic emergencies and petty thefts, Leonard Briggs found a new kind of peace. It was a deeper, more permanent quality than the satisfaction of a perfect squeegee pull. He found it in his office, his sanctuary, the small space he was transforming from a monument to neglect into a testament to order. He had taken it upon himself to restore the old sheriff's desk. The desk was made from a dark, heavy timber native to some long-forgotten world. The wood was dense, almost metallic, and would have been beautiful if anyone had ever bothered to care for it. But years of abuse had scarred it deeply. Ring stains from countless mugs, carved initials from bored deputies, and even a few blaster scorches from an incident that nobody seemed willing to discuss marred its surface. Leonard worked on it for hours. He stripped away the old, cracked varnish with a gentle yet firm chemical agent, one he had formulated himself using a recipe from his water authority days. The old finish came off in sheets, revealing the raw wood beneath. He steamed out the dents using a small handheld device designed for removing wrinkles from fabric. He filled the deeper gouges with a perfectly matched wax, colored to blend with the surrounding grain. Then he sanded, back and forth, with progressively finer grits of abrasive film. He started with a coarse grit to remove the remaining imperfections, then moved to a medium grit to smooth the surface, then to a fine grit to prepare the wood for finishing. He moved in a steady, patient rhythm, the repetition calming his mind. The work was a process, and Leonard Briggs was a man who loved to process. After sanding came polishing. He applied a thin coat of rich, dark oil, rubbing it into the wood with a soft cloth, following the grain. The oil brought out the wood's hidden depths, the complex patterns that had been buried for decades under layers of grime and neglect. The grain seemed to swirl and flow, catching the light and reflecting it back with a warm, lustrous sheen. Grum would sit in a reinforced chair in the corner of the office during these sessions, his massive form perfectly still. He would watch Leonard's patient work in silence, his deep-set eyes following the movement of the cloth, the application of the oil, the careful attention to detail. They worked in a companionable quiet, a shared stillness born from the value they both placed on doing a job properly. One afternoon, as Leonard was applying the final coat of polish, Grum rumbled. Leonard looked up. The Derg extended a primary hand. In his palm was a small, steaming mug. The aroma of something hot and vaguely herbal filled the air. It smelled like tea. Not real tea, of course. Real tea was impossible to find this far from Earth, but it smelled like someone had tried very hard to approximate tea using local ingredients. Ta, Grum stated. The word was Derg for something between here and you look like you need this. Leonard knew the mug contained a nutrient-rich ration, cube dissolved in hot water, the closest thing Dustfall Colony had to the real thing. The cubes were designed to provide complete nutrition in a compact form, and they tasted like it. But the gesture was unmistakable. Leonard smiled, a genuine, unwary smile. His chapped fingers wrapped around the mug's warmth. He looked at the desk, its surface now so smooth and deep it looked like a pool of dark water. He looked at his silent, solid deputy. Their partnership, built on shared work and quiet understanding, felt as solid and real as the old wood beneath his hands. Since losing his job at the Water Authority, he had felt adrift, an aimlessness. He had filled the days with cleaning, with order, with the simple satisfaction of a job well done. But here, in this dusty colony at the edge of known space, he had found something more. He had found an anchor. He had brought order to this small corner of the universe, and in doing so, had found a place for himself within it. The Driller's End was the social, economic, and gravitational center of Dustfall Colony. It was where miners came to spend their pay, where farmers came to complain about the weather, and where off-world freighters came to get loud and cause trouble. The cantina was a large, domed structure with a bar made from salvaged ship parts, tables that had never been level, and floor that had never been clean. This latter group, the off-world freighters, was currently exercising their right to be a public nuisance. A crew of 4 Brocs, large, surly aliens with thick rhino-like hides and a pair of curved ornamental horns signifying their clan, had decided that their table was too small. They were attempting to expand their territory by shoving the table of a trio of diminutive Lumra, fragile gas-bag creatures who floated a few centimeters off the floor, their translucent bodies pulsing with soft communicative light. "This is our spot," the lead Brock bellowed, his voice a gravelly moo. "Go find a lamp to buzz around, flutter wings." He shoved the Lumra's table again, sending a tray of brightly colored drinks sloshing to the floor. The Lumra retreated, their lights pulsing in distress. How do you win a fight without throwing a single punch? Grum, who was standing near the entrance, tensed. His normal state of mountain-like stillness gave way to the coiled energy of a rock slide waiting to happen. For 10 years, his job at the cantina had been to handle situations exactly like this, usually by physically throwing the problem into the street. He took a half-step forward, his 2 primary fists clenching. "Hold, deputy," a calm voice spoke beside him. Leonard stood there, observing the escalating confrontation with the detached air of an engineer diagnosing a faulty valve. He held a standard-issue infoblet in his hands. On its screen was the complete municipal code of Dustfall Colony, a document that Leonard had read cover to cover 3 times in the past week. "They are drunk and looking for a fight," Grum rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. I know," Leonard said. "But violence is messy. There is a tidier solution. And we just cleaned this floor." The lead Brock shoved the Lumra's table a 3rd time, sending the remaining drinks crashing to the ground. That was it. He had committed an infraction. Multiple infractions, in fact. Leonard held Grum back with a simple, placating hand gesture. With the unhurried gait of a man on his way to inspect a drainpipe, he walked into the fray. The Brocs, deep in their own boorishness, overlooked him at first. He was small, unassuming, and carrying a tablet rather than a weapon. He did not register as a threat. Leonard's focus was elsewhere. He stopped at the edge of the spill, tapped on the screen of his infotablet, and spoke in a clear, measured voice. The tablet, per municipal ordinance, synced to the cantina's audio system, and his voice, along with a series of official-sounding chimes, echoed through the now quiet room. Violation 8.3b, he announced. Improper disposal of caustic fluids on a licensed establishment's floor. That is a 20-credit fine. The lead Brock turned, his broad, flat face twisting in confusion and outrage. What in the blazes are you talking about, Pipsqueak? Leonard kept his gaze on the floor, on the spreading puddle of brightly colored liquid. Violation 11.4c, tracking of unauthorized aggregate material on a sanitized floor. He pointed a polite finger at the thick red mud caked on the Brock's boots. 25 credits. Another chime. Every patron's stare shifted from the hulking Brocks to the small, unassuming human with the tablet. Furthermore, Leonard continued, his voice relentless and calm. Violation 9.1a, exceeding local decibel ordinance, subsection belligerent shouting. That is a mandatory 30 credits per offense. I count 4 offenses in the last 2 minutes. 120 credits. Chime, chime, chime. The Brock's face went from confused to apoplectic. This is insane. We refuse to pay. You cannot make us pay. We are leaving. He took a menacing step toward Leonard, who stood his ground without flinching. Failure to pay duly logged municipal fines, Leonard said, reading from the tablet as if reciting a grocery list, will result in the immediate impounding of all associated commercial assets, pending a magisterial hearing. That would be your ship. I believe it is called the Mighty Hoof. He looked up from the tablet, his expression utterly serious. We will seal it under a Class 3 quarantine order for, let me see, potential biowaste transfer. The paperwork is dreadful. I assure you, it could take weeks to clear, possibly months. The forms alone would fill this entire cantina. The 4 freighters stopped cold. A punch they understood. A fight they understood. But the threat of having their ship, their livelihood, their home, tangled in an endless net of bureaucratic red tape was a horror beyond their comprehension. They looked at the small human, then at the mountain of a dirg standing by the door, then at the growing list of fines on the public display screen behind the bar. The leader's posture deflated. His horns, which had been held high in aggression, drooped. He let out a long, defeated sigh. Fine, he rumbled, pulling a handful of credit chits from a pouch. He slammed them on the bar, hard enough to leave dents. We will pay for the drinks. And the aggregated material. Leonard gave a curt nod. Excellent. A wise and orderly decision. He tapped his tablet a final time. A pleasant tone announced that the fines were paid. Now I believe you are just leaving. The exit is behind you. Do watch your step on the way out. The floor is freshly sanitized. The Brocks crumbled their way out of the cantina, shooting sullen glances at the human who had defeated them with a rule book and a calm voice. The door hissed shut behind them. The cantina remained silent for a long beat. Then Grum let out a low, deep rumble. It was the dirg equivalent of a hearty laugh. Weeks passed. Dustfall Colony settled into a new, quieter, more orderly rhythm. The new sheriff's comfort with, and active enjoyment of, paperwork had a profound and chilling effect on the town's more chaotic elements. Leonard settled disputes over mining claims by calmly surveying boundaries and citing obscure property bylaws, replacing fistfights with procedure. He diffused arguments in the market with the quiet promise of filling out a triplicate grievance form. He patrolled the streets with Grum at his side, a silent, massive presence that discouraged most troublemakers before they could start. The colony discovered that procedural compliance, while occasionally tedious, was far more peaceful than the alternative. One evening, Leonard sat in his clean, orderly office. The restored desk glowed under the soft light of a glow lamp, its polished surface reflecting the room's warm illumination. He was sipping from a mug of hot water with a ration tube dissolved in it. It was still a poor substitute for tea, but he had grown accustomed to its simple warmth. It was, he had decided, an acquired taste. And he had acquired it. The door hissed open, and Grum entered. His massive form momentarily blocked out the light from the corridor, casting a long shadow across the freshly cleaned floor. He held an infopad in one of his primary hands. "Sheriff," he rumbled, his deep voice filling the quiet office. "Report." Leonard took a slow sip from his mug. "Go ahead, Deputy." "Krulb," Grum said, a hint of weariness in his tone. "Accuses Vine of spore theft again. The slink was seen near the ventilation ducts. No evidence yet? But Krulb is agitated." Leonard sighed. It was a long, slow exhalation, the sound of a man who had found his place in the universe and discovered that it involved a great deal of predictable, repetitive work. The same problems, the same disputes, the same messes needing to be cleaned up again and again. He placed his mug down on a coaster, preserving the polished wood of his desk. He stood up, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape. He walked over to his custodial crate, which now sat in a place of honor by the door. The crate had accompanied him across the galaxy, had held the tools that saved a colony, had become a symbol on his unlikely journey. He opened the lid and retrieved the UV light, its casing worn smooth from use. The device had seen more action in the past few weeks than it had in the previous 5 years. He turned to his deputy, a small, tired smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Right then," Sheriff Briggs said, grabbing his well-worn coveralls from a hook on the wall. "Let us go see a man about a spore." Again, the two of them walked out into the dusty colony night, the UV light in Leonard's hand, Grum's massive shadow falling across the ground beside him. Above them, the orange giant star had set, replaced by a canopy of unfamiliar constellations. Somewhere in the darkness, a problem awaited. Somewhere, a mess needed cleaning. And Leonard Briggs, senior sanitation specialist turned sheriff, was exactly the right man for the job. If you enjoyed Leonard's unlikely journey, hit like and subscribe to Ascension of Man for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.